The finance industry loves scaring you about RMDs because fear sells. But the reality is that for 99% of Americans, required minimum distributions are a non-issue. And in today's video, I am going to prove it. My name is Eric Amzalag. I'm a certified financial planner and a retirement income certified professional. And after building hundreds of financial plans in just the last few years alone, I have learned that most of the fears that you've been sold about required minimum distributions are completely misplaced. And so in this video, I'm going to prove to you why RMDs only matter for less than 1% of retirees and why the other 99% should stop losing sleep over them. More importantly, I'm going to show you the exact point at which RMDs really begin to affect your retirement and some strategies that you can use if you're in the small minority or you simply want to manage RMDs anyways. So here's the plan in this video. First, I'm going to show you exactly how RMDs affect households at different wealth levels. Second, I'm going to show you exactly who should be concerned about the effects of RMDs. And finally, I'm going to give you some often unexplored strategies to manage the tax consequences of required minimum distributions. So let's start by looking at what actually happens when RMDs kick in. And for that, I have a scenario I'm going to show you in Income Labs. I've already put all the data in. This plan is for Mark and Lisa, and they have $1 million in pre-tax accounts in retirement savings specifically. When I run their plan in the software, this first chart here shows their expected tax brackets or their expected tax paid over the course of their retirement. And it makes it look like their taxes climb higher and higher as they age. And you might be thinking, Eric, isn't that proof that RMDs are actually a problem? Here's the catch. This chart is showing taxes in nominal dollars, which are future dollars. And so this is just inflation making their tax bill look scarier every year. This is a common problem in financial planning tools. It shows outputs in future dollars unless you toggle things to be in real dollars. Let's do that toggle right now. And when I make that change here, you're going to see that when we adjust for purchasing power, that chart flattens out. Things look a little less scary. I mean, you can still see a difference over time, but it looks a lot less scary than it did beforehand. The thing here, though, is that charts can be misleading. And so let's look at the actual effective tax rates paid over Mark and Lisa's retirement. For that, just to make viewing a little simpler, I've exported the spreadsheet here so we can just look at it at a summary level. What you can see here is that for the first X amount of years, first 6 or so years, their effective tax rate is about 7 to 8%. And once RMDs begin here at age 75, you can see that their effective tax rate actually drops. And you can't see this in the spreadsheet, but what's happening there is Social Security kicks in, they rely less on their portfolio, and even once RMDs occur, they're not forced to draw more from their pre-tax accounts than they were drawing earlier before Social Security was subsidizing their lifestyle. So think about that. In this case, with $1 million in pre-tax monies, quite a well-off family, their taxes actually go down when RMDs start. And even when we push the plan all the way out to age 90, which you can see all the way through this chart here, they don't really get back to that 8% effective tax rate until age 90. And we don't even know if they'll live that long, right? So who knows if they'll even get back to that. So in this scenario, with a household with $1 million of pre-tax monies, the scary bar chart would have told the wrong story. RMDs never really push them into a higher bracket. Let's stress test this conceptually at a higher wealth level. So the question really becomes, if $1 million in pre-tax isn't sufficient to cause a real RMD result-related tax problem, what wealth level is? Well, I tested a bunch of scenarios, and what I ended up finding out is that it takes roughly $3 million in pre-tax wealth for that to become a real problem. So suppose here that Mark and Lisa, instead of having $1 million in pre-tax accounts, have $3 million in pre-tax accounts. And that's what's happening here on this screen. And here, yes, taxes look quite a bit heavier. Let's do the same toggle, moving it from future dollars to real dollars, so we can see what inflation adjusting would do. And it does smooth out again, but still, taxes look like a bigger problem here. If we go to the summary chart to look beneath the surface and we go to the $3 million version of this, we can see here that the effective tax rate in early retirement after Social Security kicks in for them and after they've withdrawn their after-tax accounts, which again, you can't see here on the spreadsheet, but that's effectively what's happening and why they have such a low tax rate here. But once they've drawn down their after-tax accounts, their brokerage accounts, and they're now drawing on pre-tax funds, you can see that their effective tax rate hovers between 11 and 13% depending on the year. Once RMDs kick in here at age 75, that tax rate goes back from 11 or so percent to 12%, so still below where it started, and then gradually takes higher incrementally year by year until it hits pretty much a terminal rate of about 20%. Now, it does show a bump here in the final year of retirement to 25%, but who knows if they'll live that long. And also, it's only 1 year on the chart, so we're really going to pay more attention to these years where it slowly incrementally ticks up. The idea of showing this here is that even at this wealth level with 3 million in pre-tax accounts, the impact to effective tax rates is actually pretty modest. Yes, you pay more in taxes, but at this wealth level, the extra 3, 4, 5% in taxes you pay, and again, incrementally, so it's not till you're in your late 80s and 90s that it's actually a 5% or higher percentage in additional taxes, that extra tax doesn't really reduce quality of life at that wealth level. And that's really the key takeaway here. RMDs really only start to even make a dent at that $3 million threshold and higher. Now, here's the really critical part. Very few people ever reach that threshold. In fact, according to the Congressional Research Service, only 4.6% of US households even have more than 1 million saved in retirement accounts. And then according to further data from the Employee Benefit Research Institute, less than 1%, only 0.8% of households have 3 million or more. So the national numbers confirm what we've been talking about here, which is that for over 99% of retirees who will sit below that $3 million threshold, RMDs really won't rise to the level of becoming a real tax problem in retirement. So let's zoom out really quickly. Once you understand all of what I've shown you so far, the real question becomes, who actually needs to worry about RMDs? To answer that, we'll keep things pretty simple. There are 3 tiers of people, right? The first tier is going to be people who are married and not widowed, who have less than $3 million or so in pre-tax savings. And that's by far the overwhelming majority of Americans. For that group, RMDs don't really meaningfully impact your effective tax rate. They don't push you into higher brackets. They don't threaten your lifestyle. They don't really require, as a result, any extreme tax maneuvers. And as you saw in Mark and Lisa's $1 million scenario, effective tax rates can actually go down once RMDs begin because other income sources might kick in that are taxed more effectively or more friendly, meaning that your actual forced distributions might be lower than the actual pre-tax distributions you did before your RMDs. The second tier of people here are going to be people with pre-tax wealth above $3 million. And that's a tiny fraction. Like we said, it's less than 1% of retirees. Here, RMDs do matter. Balances are large enough that forced withdrawals can raise effective tax rates over time, sometimes by 5 to 6 or maybe more percentage points, especially as you get higher than $3 million in pre-tax. And even then, the impact is more about planning around taxes and legacy. It's not about survival in retirement for most people. It's going to be about flexibility of spending or just not paying the government taxes that you don't need to, if that's at all possible. So for those households, the real concern isn't, will RMDs ruin my retirement? It's, how can I manage RMDs in a way to protect heirs, minimize penalties, and maybe keep Medicare surcharges, which can be thought of as a tax, under control. The third category of people would be people with that high wealth level who also have significant age gaps between spouses. And this would be something called the widow's penalty. I'm not going to go into great detail about that in this video because I did more detail in my last RMD video, but they would also be susceptible. And so the framework's pretty simple. Figure out where you are within those 3 brackets and what you want to plan for, and then attack it from there. And so now that we know that who RMDs matter to, what households should start planning for them, let's talk about solutions. Before we talk about what to do, let's start with what you shouldn't do. So the first thing is, don't waste money on unnecessary Roth conversions. I can't tell you how many times I've seen planning software spit out recommendations to convert hundreds of thousands of dollars in early retirement that just constrains your spending flexibility in retirement. And at the end of the day, you end up converting at the same bracket that you're going to end up tax that later in retirement when RMDs kick in. That's a shell game, right? You're just shuffling money. You're prepaying the IRS for no reason. And if the rate is the same now and the same later, all you've done is accelerate taxes just to cut your own spending power early in retirement. The second thing not to do is don't let fear headlines drive your planning. Every year, I hear retirees tell me that they're terrified that taxes have nowhere to go but up. But as I showed in my last video, Congress literally just made the Trump-era tax cuts permanent. The political path of least resistance is keeping taxes low, not hiking them. And if anything, the bigger threat to your retirement is going to be inflation, not taxes as a result of RMDs or big, large tax hikes. And if you want to see more about that, you can watch the other Roth conversion video I did several weeks or month or so ago. The third thing not to do is don't obsess over widowhood unless you're in higher wealth tiers. Widowhood does affect tax brackets, but for fewer people and smaller proportion of retirees than you'd expect. If we're thinking the actual probabilities here, about half of retirees will end up widowed, and that half of retirees that end up widowed would have to really be in that $2 million to $3 million pre-tax balance at the time of widowhood, which means you're talking about a fraction of a percent of retirees who will end up facing adverse consequences as a result of tax bracket hikes because of RMDs. So what should you focus on? Well, it depends on which tier you fall into. If you're under the $3 million retirement savings kind of threshold, which is most of us, the solution is mostly perspective, right? Stop losing sleep over RMDs. They're really not going to derail your plan. But if you're over the $3 million threshold, then they probably do deserve some attention. Now, here's the thing. If RMDs are keeping you up at night, whatever threshold you're in, not my right to tell you where to be concerned or not, just to lay out the data. But if they are keeping you up at night and you missed my last video, here are 4 flexible tools you can use to manage the tax effect of RMDs. The first would be what we call blended withdrawals. Blended withdrawals are where you don't just blindly drain taxable accounts first and leave all your pre-tax accounts for later. What you can do is you can pull modest amounts from both types of accounts along the way to RMDs to naturally shrink your pre-tax account balances and therefore reduce your RMD, your forced distributions as a result of RMDs. The second option would be asset location. That's thinking about where you put your investments. You can put lower growth income producing investments in pre-tax accounts and higher growth investments into Roth or taxable accounts. And that way, the accounts that are subject to forced distributions don't balloon quite as fast. The third, and in my opinion, the best option, which does require a little more complexity, is what I call micro Roth conversions. Forget the giant 6-figure conversions at the front of your retirement that constrain your spending and stress you out with high withdrawal rates. Instead, chip away in smaller bites during low-income years or when you underspend compared to your budget, and you can use what remains in your budget in those underspending years to apply towards the cost of a Roth conversion. The fourth and final option is to use qualified charitable distributions. Once you're 70 and a half, you can donate directly from your IRA to a qualified charity, and it satisfies your required minimum distribution, but never shows up as taxable income on your tax return. These 4 options just create flexibility without sacrificing your lifestyle. So here's the bottom line. RMDs are not the tax time bomb that we've been sold. For 99% of retirees, they're just a paper tiger, something that looks scary when you show charts, but doesn't actually bite. And in most cases, those charts are designed to manipulate you to take action on things that you probably don't need to do. One couple I worked with put this perfectly. They said, after we had modeled their plan, they said, I thought RMDs were going to be a huge tax problem in our retirement, but it really turns out that they're just a speed bump to be managed. And that doesn't mean that RMDs never matter. As I said, for 0.8% of households with 3 million or more in pre-tax accounts can make a huge difference. And maybe for another small fraction of households where you have a big age gap between partners, they can be something else that make a difference. But they're really just a detail to manage and not a disaster to fear. And I don't want you to waste your retirement worrying about fake problems or worse, making expensive moves that restrict your freedom in early retirement based on fear of what might happen later. And so click the first link in the description to this video if you want to watch a free webinar where I go through the 4-step system we use at Peak Financial Planning to stress test different retirement strategies. Now, thank you as always for your time and attention. And if this video gave you some clarity, hit the like button so it reaches more retirees who need to hear this type of information, and subscribe for more deep dives just like this one. I'll see you in the next video.